Hi, today we are going to talk about aperture and depth of field in photography. So let's get started. So here's our exposure triangle. We talked about this before, right? Today we are going to concentrate on the aperture. If you remember from the last video, if we have a higher F number, we have a deeper depth of field. And if we have a smaller F number, we have a shallower depth of field. Your lenses that come with those cameras, I think, go down to f4.5, so right in this range, if you're zoomed all the way out with that lens. If you zoom in, I think the lowest you can get it is 5.6. But I just wanted you guys all to see this so that you're reminded that the aperture or the settings are all sort of interconnected, and you can't adjust the aperture without compensating in one of the other areas, so either shutter speed or ISO. We'll talk about that here, though, as we go. Okay, so you're going to take some photos to practice. You need to gather 3 objects. I started out with my coffee mugs, my coffee mug, my regular mug, my water bottle, and my travel mug. I don't know, I must like coffee or something, whatever. But I decided that these weren't that great to use because it's hard to tell which part of my water bottle is in focus. So I found some other objects. These little guys, you can tell a lot easier what is in focus on them. And mine are all the same, but yours don't have to be. So just put a little thought into what objects you use for this project. Don't choose an object that's super simple, like a pencil or something. That wouldn't work that well. Try to make it something that stands up a little bit. But I mean, whatever you use should be fine as long as it's not too simple. Okay, so we're going to adjust our camera settings first, and then we'll finish talking about our setup with our still life. So you're going to set your camera to M on the mode dial. So we want manual, right? So we want to be able to adjust all of the settings. So the mode dial is the one on top. Make sure your lens is set to AF or autofocus and not manual focus. So autofocus right here, not manual focus. Sorry, I just clicked. And the stabilizer should be set to on. You can pretty much leave that on for all of the photos that you take. It just helps eliminate some of that camera shake. Okay, you want to set your shutter speed to 1/160th of a second. That's sort of a baseline. It's kind of a good jumping off point. If we were going to shoot sports photography, we'd go faster. If we were going to shoot a still life or a portrait, we could go slower. This is a still life, so we could have gone slower on this, but I thought that would be a good place to start. To adjust that, you just turn the main dial, right? So that little dial that's right below my finger in this photo. And we know what setting we're adjusting because of the little orange arrows. And we talked about that before. So these little orange arrows right next to the numbers, that tells me that that is the setting that we're adjusting by turning the dial. So we need to adjust the ISO for this activity also. And we want ours set to auto for this one. So we had ours set to 100 for the previous activity. We want it set to auto for this. To adjust the ISO, you press this little button right here, right? That should take you to this screen. We've seen this all before, so there should be review, but it's a good idea to get comfortable doing all of this stuff. The more you do it, the more comfortable you'll be. So we want to get ours set to auto once we get to that screen. So once you get to that screen, you can just adjust the little dial right under my finger again. Okay, to auto. Again, that's what we want for this one. Next, we want to adjust the aperture, and we're going to start out at f5.6 for this activity. Okay, this is what we're concentrating on this activity, and so you'll be adjusting this a number of times. The lowest the aperture will go will depend on your lens. Like I mentioned earlier, I think yours go down to 4.5. I think I have one, the lowest on mine, I think that I have on my camera right now is like 4, so nothing too much lower. But just so you know, the lower the F number, the shallower the depth of field. And we also call this a narrow plane of focus. If it's a shallow depth of field, narrow plane of focus, same thing. I just wanted to give you a couple examples of that. So this one definitely has a shallow depth of field, right? I just took these photos today down by the river. So the shallow depth of field here, the subject is in focus, but the background is definitely blurred. I think I had this set to probably 4.0. I think actually my lens goes a little bit lower than that, but I think I had this set to f4.0. That depends on the quality of the lens too. Yours, you should be able to get some of this nice blurring in the background, but it might not be to this extent. This one, on the other hand, has a lot deeper depth of field. The things in the foreground are in focus as well as what's in the background, okay? So all of this is in focus, and this is really nice and close to me, and that side of the bridge is, you know, a pretty fair distance away from me, but it's still all in focus. So this one I used a higher F number. Lower F number here, higher F number here. Deeper depth of field, shallower depth of field. Okay, so we need to adjust the aperture for this project. To do that, again, just back to our camera settings, you press and hold this little button right here to adjust the aperture. You see mine is f6.3, but when you press and hold that, you should see those orange arrows pop back up, and that tells you that you can adjust that. Okay, so one more thing we need to adjust. We didn't do this with the previous project, but we are going to do it with this one. Instead of having the camera decide where to set the focus, we are going to tell it where to focus. So more than likely your camera was set to automatic selection for the focus. We want it to be set to manual selection with that center rectangle selected. Okay, so to do that, we need to push this button right here. So the button that's farthest to the right on the back of the camera, press that one. And we are going to try to get this to look like this. So actually it might depend on how your camera is set up already. Yours might look like this when you press that button, or it might look something like that. Okay, if it looks something like this, then you're already one step ahead of us. So if yours looks like this, if you press the set button, it should toggle to this. Okay, once you're at this screen, if you press any of these arrows right here, that will move the little yellow box. Okay, so that yellow box is telling us what the camera is going to focus on. If we had it set up like the one on the left here, then the camera would decide what to focus on. It could focus on any one of those points. We don't want to sort of leave it up to chance like that. We want to decide where it's going to focus. So we want it to focus on this center dot for this project. But like I said, if you wanted to move your point of focus to one of these other boxes, you could do that using any of these arrows right here. All right, so now we have all of our camera settings figured out. We're going to set up our still life. So if you remember from the beginning of this slideshow, you should have 3 objects, right? Mine are set right next to a yardstick so that it makes it nice and easy to tell how far apart they are. I want them to be approximately a foot apart, so 12 inches. Mine are set at 1 inch right here, or 0 inches, 12 and 24. And then I have my camera at approximately 36 inches away from my first one. So I was right about here. And that's why I have that little weird smiley face. So you can use a yardstick if you want. If not, you can eyeball it or you can estimate. That's fine. Okay, so finally we're ready to take some photos. For these photos, you are going to be focusing on the middle object. So that's why I had you collect 3 objects. We want to be able to see which ones are in focus. So we're going to be focusing on the middle object, but the other ones are going to come into focus eventually, and you'll see that. Okay, the shutter speed again is going to stay consistent for all of our photos, as is the ISO. Well, the way we have the ISO set. Your camera will probably be adjusting that ISO, but we don't need to worry about that. So have that set to auto. Don't mess with that at all. Don't mess with the shutter speed at all. Just leave those 2. So the aperture, again, we're going to start at f5.6. All right. So at f5.6, my middle guy here, again, we will be focusing on the middle object for all of the photos. So focusing on him, he's in focus, right? We see a little bit of grain because my office was not super bright when I was taking these photos. So we're seeing a little bit of a grain to the photo, but it's not too bad. Okay, so he's in focus, this front one's out of focus, and the back one's out of focus. Okay, so I have 2 photos with the same setup here, same settings exactly. I just zoomed in on one of them. This is the one where I'm zoomed out, and let's look at the next one where I'm zoomed in. So this is the same exact setup, I'm just zoomed in. I thought this showed everything a little bit more clearly, but I wanted you to see the difference. Okay, so again, same exact settings as that previous photo that I showed you, the previous slide. he's in focus, this guy's out of focus, and this guy's out of focus. This guy, you can't even tell what this front guy is. He just looks like a blob of color, which is exactly what we expected at this setting. So he's definitely out of focus, and that back one is out of focus. Okay, second photo. Again, shutter speed and ISO stay the same. Adjust the aperture to f6.3. So he's definitely in focus. This front one is out of focus, but I see a little bit more detail here. And then that back one, we can see what he is, but he's out of focus too, right? Okay, third photo, shutter speed and ISO stay exactly the same. Aperture is bumped up to f8.0. And again, in focus, you can see a little bit more detail here in the front one. And in the back one, he's getting a little bit more clear step by step, right? Excuse me. All right, let's see the fourth photo. So fourth photo, shutter speed and ISO, don't mess with those at all. Aperture is bumped up to f11. Middle one's in focus. The front one is getting a lot more clear, right? But still pretty blurry. And then that back one is getting close to being in focus. Okay, fifth photo, shutter speed, ISO the same, aperture f13. He's definitely in focus, right? Our middle one's in focus. The front one is getting a whole lot closer, right? And the back one's pretty close to being in focus. We're getting a little bit of blurriness from the grain, which is a result of the high ISO that it's compensating for the low light, but that's okay. Sixth photo, same settings for the first two. Aperture is f16. So our middle one again is in focus. Front one is getting a whole lot closer. Back one is pretty close to being in focus. And our last seventh photo, our aperture is f20. It's a lot darker, right? Middle guy's in focus. Front one's pretty close, and the back one's pretty close to being in focus. Okay, so there we go. And now I just wanted to bring you back to the exposure triangle. So if you notice, my photos continued to get a lot darker as I increased my F number, right? And we see that here. So I started out at f5.6, so I was kind of in the middle of this little brightness scale here. And as I took more photos and increased my F number, my brightness went way down, right? And I have all of my, or I think most of my photos here. So here's my last one that I took, which was really pretty dark. Then it continues to lighten up a little bit as my F number gets smaller. So it continues to lighten and lighten. And then there was my first one that I took. And that one was the lightest, right? Okay, so what you need to do and hand in for this activity. You're going to take 7 photos following along with the steps that I went through. You're going to take one each at, whoops, I kind of repeated myself there, didn't I? Sorry about that. So one each at each of these settings. So 5.6, 6.3, 8, 11, 13, 16, and 20. So you can turn that in just like you did for the last activity in a Google slide presentation or a Google Doc. Just make sure you label each of your photos with the setting that you took those photos at. And make sure also that you take your photos in a room where you have a little bit of natural light. I actually took mine in my office, and it has a big window, and so that lets in a lot of natural light, but it almost wasn't even enough at certain times of day. So make sure you keep that in mind. I would recommend doing this during the day by a window so that all of your photos are pretty clear. All right, I think that is about it. If you have any questions at all, just let me know.